Hey guys, Zomfox here, and it's time to do a video talking about the teams that got shelved in the UFL. The USFL and XFL merger saw 8 teams not make the final cut for the new league, to where we went from 16 down to 8 teams. And so with that, it's time to discuss what teams I think actually could come back in the next couple years, who I don't think are ever coming back, and who could be back in a while. Now, essentially with this one is that it is a tier list. It's the odds of each team coming back based on my opinion on pretty much a lot of things. Now, the one thing I want to mention first and foremost, I'm not talking about stadiums, okay? Look, they're a very big deal in terms of the fact that a lot of these cities have 2-3 different stadiums that a team could play in. But there's a lot of issues, whether it be it's an MLS stadium, so you have to deal with playing second fiddle to an MLS team that gets, the schedule to be made for them first. Or you have NFL stadiums where they're great stadiums, but you're playing in front of like 15, 20,000 people in a 60,000 plus seat stadium, with only the Battlehawks being the exception. So there's a lot of issues with it. Only one of the teams I'm actually going to talk about their stadium because it's very obvious. And the other thing is that this is based on their actual cities. Again, with one exception, it is where you played. I'm not making the case of, the Generals could move to Canton. No, it's based on where their name is located or where they have played. So without further ado, let's look at the tier list. Now, the tier list is pretty simple. The top is the best, the bottom is the worst. The top are teams that I think are all but a guarantee to be back in the next 2 years. Now, we've heard rumors that in 2025 we will see 2 teams come back. There's speculation that the government has stipulations put in it in the merger to where we might see 2 teams come back for at least 4 years to get up to 16 teams again. Or it's just 2 teams come back next year, then we wait a year and then 2 come back. We don't know for sure. But this is going based off pretty much 2 teams come back every year in a sense. Teams that I think are a guarantee to be back within those 2 years. Then we have could be back in the next 2 years. These are teams I'm not fully sure on, but I would not be shocked if they came back in the next 2 years for one reason or another. Then we have the near 100% guarantee, but it will be for a while. A while pretty much means 3+ years or 3 expansions plus. This would be teams that I don't think would come back until 2027, the earliest. And these are teams that I do think are for sure coming back. It's just, when do they come back? Then we have could be back, but not for a while. Teams I fully expect to be back and eventually be in this merge league. It's just, we're not going to see them for a while. And there is a chance that they end up getting swapped out for somebody else. As the bottom tier is I don't see a return anytime soon. This pretty much means that they won't be back in time for the first 16 teams to be back. These are essentially the teams that I don't see coming back for a while, pretty much till at least 2029. So these are teams that I feel like just have the lowest odds of getting it. So the higher up on the tier list, the better, with I guess the kind of exception being the 3rd tier. But without further ado, let's get started with coming in as the first team to talk about in the Guardians. The Guardians are pretty weird. The fact is that the Guardians have 2 places they could play. They could play in New York or Orlando. And this is a big deal because there are 3 major areas that the UFL is currently missing out on. They've got Texas, but they're missing the California area, the Northeast, mainly New York, New Jersey area, and then Florida. And the Guardians just happen to fit 2 of those places. They could come back to one of them. And the fact is that I think everyone knows that we're going to see more Eastern teams come back first before we see West teams come back. And California is the weakest of those 3 areas for a lot of reasons. Taxes, travel distance, being in California. So the Guardians, I feel like, have an actually good chance to come back. And I'm actually putting them at the top tier. I think the Guardians will be back in the next 2 years. Yes, they're not the best team that we saw. They're not the most popular team. But the fact is that bringing a team back to Florida or bringing a team to New York are both things that the league, one of them, they will be doing in the next couple years. And I feel like they're just going to be back. Of all the XFL teams that got cut, I feel like they have the single best shot at coming back. Because people are speculating that there's a chance that, let's say in 2025, we'll see 2 USFL teams come back and only 0 XFL teams by moving the Roughnecks back to the XFL conference, which, yeah, would be confusing, but they already made it confusing with the Gamblers becoming Roughnecks. So that could very well happen. It could be 1-1, we don't know for sure. But if bare minimum, only 1 team from the XFL comes back in the next 2 years, it's going to be the Guardians. If we do see 2 USFL teams and then 1-1, or 1-1 and then 2 USFL teams to make it a true even split 2 years down the road, The Guardians are the one team to come back. And if two XFL teams come back, it just makes it even more obvious they come back. Whether it be in New York or Orlando, we'll see. There are New Jersey and Tampa teams available as well. But the Guardians, I don't really see a league in 2 years where they're not in it. So I'm at the top tier. I think they will be back in the next couple of years. Then the Tampa Bay Bandits. Yes, I am including any team that is under the UFL name that has played. So the Bandits do count. I'm going to be honest. I think they might be back. Just not for a while. Look, the Bandits were the team that essentially got scrapped for the Showboats due to the quote-unquote bad online reception of them, the lack of merch sales and all that. The fact is I could see them back. There is another team that actually could go to Tampa, but that Tampa team also has a lot of other options we'll get to. So I would not be shocked if the Bandits come back. Hell, I would not be shocked at all if we do see the Guardians and Bandits come back at the same time. I just don't really see it personally. I think they're going to be back in a while. I think this is that last year of initial expansion they'll do, if it is 2 years or 2 teams per year. I feel like they'll be part of that last group to just kind of shore up the map or something, or just to go with the Guardians in a few years or something. I do think they will be back. I think that a lot of people have spoken out about how upset they were they got cut in year 1. And the fact is they are a somewhat historic team. They were massively popular back in the 80s. So I would not be shocked if they come back, and I think they have a better shot at coming back than a couple other teams. But I don't personally see them being back for a few years. And then we have the Gamblers, who I'm reluctantly putting at the very bottom. Look, could they move to a new city? Sure. But like I said, I'm not talking about that. The Gamblers, I don't see them coming back. The fact is you already have a Houston team. Now, yes, if the league wants to truly piss off the western side of the country that likes the league, they can bring back the Gamblers instead of any team out west. But the fact is that the Gamblers have no room to come back. There's already a team in Houston. I doubt they want to add another Houston team, considering all the backlash the XFL got in 2023 for having 3 Texas teams, and now the UFL has gotten in 2024 for having 3 Texas teams. I don't see them adding another one. Could they? Sure. There is an alternate reality where we're going to see 4 teams in Texas, 3 teams in Florida, and still 0 out west. But I think that in our reality, I think that the Gamblers just don't come back. Could they in 2029 or down real in the future if the league ever gets to like 20 teams? Sure, they could. But the fact is they've already got a Houston team. There's 3 Texas teams. I don't see them coming back. I know they're historic because of Jim Kelly. I don't see it. And let's get the other team out of the way that I don't see coming back, and that's going to be the Wildcats. I don't even really want to talk about them for that much long, like themselves. It's just, the Wildcats, yes, they changed the name to the UFL Wildcats, and everyone made a way bigger deal than they should have about it. Let's be real. The Wildcats are not coming back. They were awful in attendance in California. California is an expensive place. You got a lot of issues with taxes. You got a lot of issues with everything. And if the league wants to actually succeed, they're going to get rid of the Arlington hub of all the teams flying out to their games. And so when you have teams actually staying in their city, LA is like the worst place to do that. So yes, while California is a big market, I would sooner see them go to Florida and New York than California. The Wildcats are not famous by any means. Almost nobody felt bad about them getting cut. So I don't see them coming back. I think they're the other team that doesn't come back. If this league goes to a 16-team league in, let's say, 4 years, these are the 2 teams I don't see being a part of it. Because there is technically 18 total teams, but I see 16 being the end goal, and these 2 missing out. Now let's get to the other team I see that will be back in the next 2 years. That is the New Orleans Breakers. This is the one exception about the stadium. We all know pretty much that in 2026, as long as stadium renovations go well, they're going to be playing at the Shrine Airlines Stadium in New Orleans. The head of the New Orleans, or the stadium renovations, literally said the USFL talked to them about it. He wouldn't say that if they're not trying to actually bring the team there and, already have a good relationship. The Breakers will be back in 2026, barring like some horrid construction work done at the stadium. I feel it's all but a guarantee. The Breakers are massively popular online, despite never playing a game in New Orleans. They had an insanely good team. I believe that they had arguably the second best team in all of spring football this past season. They are a great team, great fan base. I would be shocked if they're not back in 2026. They won't be back next year. They just won't because of the whole stadium deal, unless they decide to go to Tulane for a year. But I see them being back in 2026 is all but a guarantee. Now, the next team to talk about is going to be the Sea Dragons. This is a controversial one. A lot of people want them to be back soon, and while some people might act like they'll be back next year, let's be real, they're not coming back for a couple years. Okay, the whole point of this merger was to save money, and bringing back the Dragons does none of that. You bring the Dragons out, you are making travel costs a nightmare, because now you're flying 2 teams out to Seattle to go play games, and even if you have them live at Seattle, you're still flying Seattle to the rest of the country, and the rest of the country to Seattle. I do think they're a guarantee. It's going to be 3 years or more. They're going to be back once the full eastern central side of the U.S. is done getting teams, or almost done getting teams. That's when they'll come back. They're not doing a West expansion next year, and I don't see it being in 2 years. It's going to be at least 3 years, I feel. There's too many teams that you can bring back in the central and eastern side of the country to bring back the Dragons. It just doesn't make any sense geographically. Doesn't make sense financially, especially considering the fact the last time they were here in this past season, the schedule makers just completely screwed them over. So I think the Dragons, they are massively popular, but they won't be back for a couple years. It's going to be a minimum of 3 years, though if this league makes it to, the 4 years, they will be back. It's not going to be for the next couple of years. And then we have the Maulers, which are a weird one. This team got insanely popular in its second season. A lot of people actually want them to go to Canton, but a lot of people want them to go to Pittsburgh. They changed their color scheme to it. I think they could be back in the next 2 years. The fact is they are very, very good geographically. Where they are, you have another couple of teams that can be brought back that are right next to them, and it's overall really close to a lot of other places, and they are a popular team. And yes, we've talked about, the stadiums there and whatnot, but the fact is the Maulers could very well be back in the next couple of years. They got really popular. It'd be a big disservice to not bring them back. I feel like a lot of people would love to see them come back, because I'd assume if they do come back, Ray or Jaron is going to be the head coach, whether they bring Ray back or Jaron becomes the head coach. And the fact is that they're a really loved franchise, like I've said. They just made it to the title game. A lot of people are upset that they got cut. So I think that they have a really good shot at coming back. It's just, I'm not going to say they're a guarantee to come back, but I think that in the next 2 years, there's a very real shot that they will be back. Now, we have the New Jersey Generals. The Generals are an odd one because they are a very historic USFL team. They are one of those 2 teams, them with the Stars, that are spring football history. That they rise above everybody else. I mean, modern people act like the Battlehawks are, that team. Nah, the Generals and the Stars are those teams. They are the 2 pinnacles, the 2 pillars, the 2 greatest, the 2 goats of spring football. One of them for being successful, the other one for being a insane marketing team, whether it be Donald Trump owning them, getting Doug Flutie, or Herschel Walker. It's a big deal. That being said, I don't see them back for a little bit. The only reason I say this, and it goes with the Bandits, is because of the Guardians. I see the Guardians coming back. Wherever they come back, the other team I feel has the best shot at coming back. If the Guardians return to Florida, I think the Generals have a better shot at coming back. And then if the Guardians go to New York, there's a better shot the Bandits come back. Could they bring them both and put them both in the same area? Could they bring both the New York and New Jersey team or 2 Florida teams back for travel costs? Sure, they could. But I personally think that they want to get those 2 markets down, and they're going to get the Guardians and then one of those 2 teams. So that's why I'm putting them both. They could be back, but not for a while, because I feel like one of them has a realistic shot at being back in the next 2 years, and then the other one just has no shot at being back in the next 2 years, as well as them both maybe even having to wait a minimum of 3 years. I think that's where the Generals go. It's a shame that they have to wait that long for being such a historic team, but in truth, in terms of popularity, I feel like, at least from what I've seen on the online presence, they're on the lower end of the USFL teams. The Breakers had much more buzz. The Maulers had much more buzz. The 3 teams that had a stadium had more buzz. The Stars had more buzz. The Breakers. It felt like they were the lowest, despite being a really solid team in year 1. But despite their history, I think it is going to take them a few years to come back. I do think they will. It's just going to take a bit. And then we have the Vipers, which... This is a weird one, because on one hand, you wouldn't expect them to even be anywhere but the bottom, because that visual impression they left you is horrid. They left you a worse impression playing in front of people than any USFL team did with playing in front of nobody. Because Cashman Field was such a disaster and the team was so awful that your visual sight of them is playing on an awful-looking field in front of a very small crowd, terrible team. But in truth, putting them in the fourth tier, I think they could be back, but not for a while. They just have too many options. You've got Vegas, you've got Tampa Bay, and the fact is there's already rumors that they could have moved to Portland or Arizona. So they probably will be back in a while. I almost want to put them in near 100%, but I'm not going to. I think the fact is that they have a realistic shot at being back soon. Because of how many options they have available to them in terms of returning, because of the fact that they already were potentially leaving Vegas, it gives them a lot of outs that teams like the Generals and Bandits don't have, where they're going to go to that one location, whereas the Vipers can go to a lot of places. So I'm putting them, it could be back, but not for a while, because at the end of the day, they do leave such a bad visual and they're just a bad team to think about in every single regard. They're not popular compared to any other team pretty much. It's not like people are going to miss them. There were memes about it, but when you talk about the actual team, nobody cared about them. The only thing that mattered was Luis Perez getting traded and then immediately being better when he left. So the Vipers could be back, not for a while, not because of how good the team was, but because of the fact they just have so many options available to them. And then we have the last team to talk about in the Philadelphia Stars. The Stars is tough. They're not as popular as pretty much any team but the Generals, I would say, in the USFL side. But I'm putting them in could be back within 2 years. If we do see it be the UFL wants to move the Roughnecks back to the XFL conference, I fully expect 2025 to see the Stars and Maulers come back. The Pennsylvania rivalry that they weren't able to really do because neither team played in Pennsylvania. I personally see that happening if they decide to bring the Roughnecks back to the XFL conference. Doing that would make it 5-5, and you'd have the Pennsylvania rivalry. You'd bring back the Maulers-Panthers rivalry, and the Stars naturally did go to the championship game and come just one game shy of making the playoffs this last year. And they have a lot of guys that, whereas the team this past year wasn't incredible, Case Cookus, a monster, Adam Rodriguez, a monster, Corey Coleman, a monster. So I think that all things considered, they have a really good shot at coming back in the next 2 years. Because of their history, because their history is more important than the Generals, if you view it as a pure football sense, them winning 2 championships, them making it to all 3 of the original championships, them being the team people actually viewed that could compete in the NFL, and then their first year back making the title game and coming just this close to beating the Stallions in the title game, I feel like they'll probably be back in the next 2 years. And so that'll pretty much be the list. I think the Guardians and Breakers are the 2 teams I would almost guarantee will be back in 2 years. I think the Maulers and Stars are the 2 teams that have the best shot at coming back with them in the next 2 years, barring them bringing back 2 XFL teams. I think the Dragons, they will be back. It just is going to be once they do a West expansion, which I think will be a minimum of 2027. Then I think the Bandits, Generals, and Vipers all could be back in the next few years. It's just going to depend on where certain teams get placed and how they want to expand. Then the Gamblers and Wildcats, if they're going to return, it's going to be at least 5 years till they return. I don't see them coming back anytime soon. So let me know what you guys think down below in the comments. Do you agree with this tier list? Do you have a couple that you'd change? What are your reasons for them? And all that. Make sure you subscribe and hit the bell. Remember, we're doing the giveaway at 1,000 subscribers and the Q&A at 500. We're on the road to 500 before the season starts. And as always, guys, have a great night.